She worked the TSA checkpoint at one of the country's busiest airports for 11 years. She screened hundreds of thousands of passengers. She watched the ground operations of every major airline that ran through that terminal, day after day, year after year. She saw which carriers ran tight, organized ground crews, and which ones consistently had aircraft sitting at gates past departure, with maintenance carts parked underneath them. She saw which airlines had crew members moving through the checkpoint with the focused calm of a well-run operation, and which ones had crews visibly stressed, running late, arguing with gate agents about equipment issues before they had even boarded. When she left the job, one of the first things she told people she knew was which airlines she would not personally choose to fly. This video is based on her perspective, combined with the publicly available FAA enforcement records, DOT consumer complaint data, and documented safety investigations that back up what she and others in similar positions have observed from the ground level. Nothing here is speculation. The concerns flagged below have paper trails, and every one of them is something a traveler can verify independently before they book their next flight. Here is what she wants you to know. The first thing to understand is what working the TSA checkpoint actually teaches you about an airline that you cannot learn from the outside. TSA agents do not inspect aircraft. They do not have access to maintenance records. Their job is passenger and baggage screening, and that is the lane they operate in. So when a former TSA officer talks about airline safety concerns, she is not claiming to have seen inside an engine or reviewed an airworthiness directive. She is talking about something different, the operational culture of an airline as it expresses itself on the ground, in the terminal, in the behavior of the crews and the ground staff, and in the pattern of delays. Equipment swaps and irregular operations that reveal whether an airline is running comfortably within its operational limits or is consistently pushing against them. An airline that regularly swaps aircraft at the gate, that consistently has maintenance holds that push departures by an hour or more, that has crew members visibly frustrated and communicating poorly with ground staff, is showing you something real about how it manages its fleet and its people. Those patterns are visible to anyone who works in a busy terminal long enough to recognize them. And experienced TSA officers, like experienced gate agents and experienced airport employees of every kind, do recognize them. That context matters for what comes next. Spirit Airlines. Spirit is the most complained about airline in the United States by a significant margin, according to the Department of Transportation's Air Travel Consumer Report, which has tracked consumer complaints by carrier for decades. In multiple recent reporting periods, Spirit's complaint rate per passenger carried has been 2 to 3 times higher than the industry average. The complaints are dominated by a few consistent categories: cancellations, delays, lost or mishandled baggage, and what the Department of Transportation categorizes as customer service failures. The complaint rate is not an accident. It is the predictable output of a business model that keeps base fares low by unbundling virtually every element of the travel experience and charging separately for things that other airlines include. These charges include carry-on bag fees, seat selection fees, fees for printing your boarding pass at the airport, and fees for larger seats in a cabin where most of the seats are already smaller than industry standard due to tighter pitch configurations. The cost of flying Spirit on a route where you need a carry-on bag, a selected seat, and a checked bag frequently approaches or exceeds the price of a comparable ticket on a full-service carrier. What the ultra-low-cost model means beyond the fees is that every operational efficiency gets squeezed. Aircraft utilization rates are maximized, turnaround times are compressed, and the buffer built into the schedule to absorb routine delays is thinner than at legacy carriers. When something goes wrong, and in commercial aviation, something occasionally always goes wrong, the cascading effect through Spirit's tightly scheduled network is disproportionately large. A single mechanical delay in the morning can ripple through multiple aircraft and multiple routes across the entire day. From the checkpoint perspective, Spirit's ground crews at busy airports are frequently visible as among the most stretched in the terminal. That is a function of the staffing model as much as anything else. Frontier Airlines. Frontier occupies similar territory to Spirit in the ultra-low-cost carrier category and carries similar operational concerns. In Department of Transportation mishandled baggage rankings, Frontier has appeared in the worst-performing tier of United States carriers across multiple recent reporting periods. Mishandled baggage is worth paying attention to as an operational metric because it reflects the efficiency and care of the ground handling operation, which is the same team managing aircraft turnarounds, loading, fueling, and the ground-level work that keeps departures on schedule. Frontier's consumer complaint rate has also ranked among the higher end of United States carriers in recent Department of Transportation data. Like Spirit, the complaint categories skew toward cancellations, delays, and customer service responsiveness. Frontier's customer service infrastructure, like that of most ultra-low-cost carriers, is built around digital channels rather than airport-based service, which means that when something goes wrong in person at the airport, the resolution path is slower and more frustrating than with carriers that have robust gate agent staffing. The structural issue with ultra-low-cost carriers like Frontier and Spirit is not that they are unsafe in a regulatory sense. Both carriers hold operating certificates. Both are subject to Federal Aviation Administration oversight, and both have safety records that are not dramatically distinguished from the broader domestic industry. The concern is that the economic pressure baked into their business model creates a culture where operational margins are thin and where the consequences of that thinness fall disproportionately on the passenger. Allegiant Air. Allegiant deserves its own extended discussion because its story is different in kind from the ultra-low-cost carrier concerns above. In 2019, the Tampa Bay Times and 60 Minutes jointly published an investigative report on Allegiant Air's safety record that drew significant national attention. The investigation documented an unusually high rate of serious in-flight incidents relative to the carrier's size, including mid-air engine failures, flights that had to turn back due to mechanical issues, smoke in the cabin, hydraulic failures, and pressurization problems. The investigation covered a period of roughly 5 years and found that Allegiant experienced a serious mechanical incident, defined as an incident significant enough to trigger an FAA report, at a rate substantially higher than comparable carriers. The investigation also examined the composition of Allegiant's fleet at that time, which included a significant proportion of older MD-80 series aircraft that were, even by the standards of that reporting period, aging narrow-body jets requiring more intensive maintenance attention. Allegiant has since modernized portions of its fleet, adding Airbus A320 family aircraft, and has made operational changes in the years since the investigation. The FAA's response to the investigation was to conduct its own review of Allegiant's safety management system. The agency has authority to take enforcement action against carriers that violate airworthiness requirements, and Allegiant has received FAA enforcement actions related to maintenance issues in its documented history. The point is not that Allegiant is uniquely dangerous among all carriers operating today. The point is that the documented pattern of incidents during that period, the nature of the investigation's findings, and the FAA attention it generated represent a level of scrutiny that is meaningfully different from what the major legacy carriers and the larger ultra-low-cost carriers have faced. Travelers who want to make genuinely informed decisions about which carrier to fly deserve to know that this record exists, and that they can read the original investigation themselves. American Airlines, including a major legacy carrier on this list, requires a different kind of framing, because American Airlines is one of the largest airlines in the world, operates tens of thousands of flights annually, and its aggregate safety record is broadly consistent with the rest of the domestic major carrier group. The concern with American Airlines is more specific and more recent. American has faced FAA enforcement actions related to its maintenance practices that have generated significant attention within the aviation safety community. In 2010, the FAA fined American Airlines $24.2 million for operating aircraft that had not received required fuselage inspections, one of the larger maintenance-related fines levied against a major U.S. carrier at that time. More recently, American's outsourcing of maintenance work to third-party facilities has been a subject of scrutiny from both the FAA and from pilots' unions. In 2019, Americans Pilots Union raised formal concerns about maintenance quality standards at some third-party facilities used by the carrier. Third-party maintenance outsourcing is legal and common across the industry, but the quality control standards at outsourced facilities vary, and ensuring consistent compliance across a network of external contractors requires robust oversight. American has also dealt with a pattern of airworthiness directives, which are FAA orders requiring specific inspections or repairs on aircraft types or components that in some cases resulted in groundings or operational restrictions. Airworthiness directives are a normal part of aviation safety management and are issued across all carriers. The pace and nature of the directives affecting American's specific fleet composition in recent years have been notable enough to warrant mention in the context of an informed traveler's decision-making. None of this makes American Airlines categorically unsafe. The vast majority of American's flights operate without incident. The concern is about documented patterns that a traveler making an informed decision deserves to factor in. If this kind of information is useful to you, hit subscribe. New travel content every week, covering the things airlines and airports know that most passengers do not. Now let's talk about how to actually use all of this. The FAA safety rating system and what it misses. Every commercial airline operating in the United States holds an FAA operating certificate and is subject to ongoing safety oversight. The FAA's oversight framework is genuinely rigorous by global standards, and the United States commercial aviation safety record over the past decade has been, broadly speaking, very good. Accidents involving fatalities on major United States carriers are statistically rare, but the FAA certification and oversight system measures regulatory compliance. It does not measure operational culture, maintenance culture, or the degree of comfort with which an airline operates within its regulatory requirements. An airline can be technically compliant with every FAA requirement and simultaneously be operating with tighter margins, less redundancy in its maintenance scheduling, and a more reactive rather than proactive approach to safety than a competitor that exceeds minimum requirements. The difference between an airline that meets the minimum and an airline that builds meaningful safety margin above the minimum is not visible in the operating certificate. It is visible in incident rates, near-miss reporting rates, pilot and mechanic culture surveys, union safety grievance records, and the kind of investigative journalism the Tampa Bay Times conducted on Allegiant. Ultra-low-cost carrier model and maintenance culture. The economic logic of ultra-low-cost flying requires maximizing aircraft utilization. That means aircraft spend more time in the air and less time on the ground. Maintenance windows are scheduled around flying schedules rather than flying schedules being built around maintenance windows. This is not illegal. It is managed within Federal Aviation Administration regulated maintenance intervals. Experienced commercial aviation mechanics who have spoken publicly about the difference in maintenance culture between legacy carriers and ultra-low-cost carriers consistently note that the pressure to return aircraft to service quickly is more intense at carriers where the margin between revenue and cost is thinner. That pressure does not necessarily produce unsafe outcomes, but it creates a culture where the path of least resistance is to address the minimum required issue and return the aircraft to service rather than to address adjacent concerns proactively while the aircraft is already grounded. Pilots at ultra-low-cost carriers have raised similar concerns through their unions. Records of safety. Grievances filed by pilot unions at Spirit and Frontier are public documents in some cases, and the categories of concern raised are worth reading for anyone who wants a ground-level perspective from the people flying the aircraft. How to check an airline's actual record before you book. The Federal Aviation Administration maintains a publicly searchable enforcement database on its website. It shows enforcement actions taken against airlines, including fines and compliance orders related to maintenance and safety violations. The database is updated regularly and is searchable by carrier name. The Department of Transportation publishes the Air Travel Consumer Report every month. That report includes complaint rates, on-time performance, mishandled baggage rates, and denied boarding statistics by carrier. The report is free and publicly available and it is one of the most directly useful tools for comparing airlines across operational metrics that affect travel quality. AirlineRatings.com is an independent aviation safety and product rating organization that publishes annual safety ratings for airlines worldwide based on audit results, incident history, fleet age, and regulatory standing. Their methodology is transparent and rankings are updated when new information warrants changes. They are not the only source worth consulting, but they are a credible one. The Aviation Safety Reporting System, called ASRS, is operated by NASA. It maintains a database of voluntary incident reports submitted by pilots, flight attendants, air traffic controllers, and mechanics. These are anonymous reports of safety concerns and incidents. Reading reports for a specific carrier type or aircraft type gives a ground-level sense of the operational concerns being raised by the people inside those aircraft every day. The routes and airports where risk is higher. One dimension of this conversation that often gets missed is that the airline on the ticket is not always the airline operating the aircraft. Regional flying, the short-hop routes connecting smaller cities to major hubs, is frequently operated by regional carriers under the mainline carrier's code, in an arrangement called a code share or wet lease. When you book a Delta flight from a regional airport to Atlanta, the actual aircraft may be operated by SkyWest Airlines, Endeavor Air, or another Delta connection carrier. When you book an American flight from a small city to Dallas, the operating carrier might be Envoy Air or PSA Airlines. These regional carriers operate under their own FAA certificates and have their own safety records, which may or may not match those of the mainline carrier whose brand appears on the ticket. Regional flying also involves smaller aircraft, shorter runways, more weather-exposed approaches, and the earlier career pilots who build hours on regional routes before moving to mainline operations. None of this makes regional flying categorically more dangerous, but it does make the operating carrier worth checking before you assume that the brand on your ticket tells you who is actually flying the plane. You can find the operating carrier information on your booking confirmation or by calling the airline directly. What the TSA perspective adds and what it honestly does not. It would be dishonest to frame the TSA checkpoint experience as a complete window into airline safety. The honest version is that it is one window among several. It shows a specific slice of how an airline operates, a slice that carries genuine signal value, but it needs to be understood for what it is. What the checkpoint experience does reveal is operational culture at the ground level. An airline whose crews are consistently stressed, whose maintenance holds are frequent and visible, whose ground operations look like they are perpetually running behind, is showing you something real about whether that carrier operates with margin or without it. That observation does not override the regulatory record. It supplements it in a way that numbers on a page cannot fully capture. The honest recommendation from someone who has spent years watching this up close is not to avoid flying entirely or to refuse to fly any of the carriers named above under any circumstances. Commercial aviation is genuinely safe by almost any comparative measure. The recommendation is to be an informed consumer. Look at the DOT data. Check the FAA enforcement record. Know who is actually operating your regional flight. Understand what the ultra-low cost model means for your experience when something goes wrong. And factor all of it in when you decide whether saving $40 on a Spirit ticket to Fort Lauderdale is actually a saving when you account for the fees, the delays, and the customer service experience waiting on the other side. The information is public. It has always been public. Most people just never knew to look. Hit subscribe if you want to keep knowing where to look. Every week there is a new video covering what airlines, airports, and the entire travel industry know that the average passenger does not. The video on screen now covers the 12 things flight attendants know about your flight that they are not going to tell you during boarding, and it pairs directly with what you just heard.